Afternoon, everyone. My name is Amir Shahsavari. I'm the Vice President of the Small Property Owners Association, also known as SPOA. I'm joined by Allison Drescher, who is SPOA's President. This is our second webinar speaking to candidates running for Mayor of Boston. It's our pleasure to introduce Mr. John Barros today. John said it's okay for us to address him by his first name, so that's what we're going to do. John was the former Chief of Economic Development under former Boston Mayor Marty Walsh. And before we speak to him, before Allison introduces him, I just wanted to say a quick word about who we are. We are small housing providers. I don't use the term landlord because the term landlord is antiquated and it sends the wrong message. We're not lords. We are small business owners. It's also important to add that we're regular people too, because we've often had to fight this very negative stereotype that we are cold, calculated machines or even monsters or something other. We're not. Most of us are female, minority, and family-owned businesses. And the word family is important because we treat our tenants like family members as well. I'm not knocking big businesses in any way, but the small business owner is in a position to add that crucial personal touch while treating tenants with respect and flexibility. And we do provide over 60% of the rental housing in Massachusetts. We also do important work. We not only put our savings on the line to provide people with housing, but we generate work for other businesses, the electricians, the plumbers, the carpenters, the material suppliers, the brokers, the insurance business, the banks, and the list goes on. And so beyond that, we also contribute a lot to our communities through the taxes that we pay. Historically, we've been neglected. People don't often think about the struggles that we face as we perform the important work that we do. And the pandemic hasn't been easy on us. It's been incredibly, incredibly difficult. The eviction moratoriums especially. We haven't been able to access our hard-earned income because of the moratoriums. And as a result, we've had to shoulder the difficult task of sheltering our tenants without the income that we need to run our properties, to safely maintain them, not only for the benefit of our tenants, but for the benefit of ourselves. We have personal bills to pay, we have to run our businesses, and for the sake of our properties. It's been very difficult. We do appreciate the fact that the government has tried to provide rental assistance, but at the moment, we have to disagree with the way that's been implemented, using the tenants as the middle people. That's created a lot of complexity, a lot of bureaucratic complexity. And so that's why SPOA has advocated for owner-based rental programs to eliminate the tenant as the middleman and to eliminate all the bureaucratic red tape that we've had to encounter. So as the program continues, you can feel free to ask questions in the chat box at the bottom of your screen. If time permits, we'll do our best to address those questions. And I'd also like to ask you kindly to donate to the Small Property Owners Association. Our website is www.spoa.com. We all have to stick together for the tenants' sake and for our own welfare to get through these difficult times. And having said that, it's my pleasure to turn it over to Allison Drescher, who will introduce John Barros.
We'd really like to thank you, John, for coming and joining us today and talking with us about property issues, which I know you've had a lot to say about, so we're excited to talk to you. And just to give a little bit of background on John, John is Cape Verdean, born in Cape Verde?
Born in Boston, Allie.
Okay. Well, I actually have some Cape Verdean people who work with me who are a very important part of my life. So I know it's a wonderful place that I'd like to go someday. But John has 4 young children, which is a lot of children, and a lovely wife from the looks of her picture. John also was the Chief of Economic Development for Marty Walsh. And now he's running for mayor. So we're going to turn the program over to John to talk to all of you a little bit about his views on property ownership. And then we are going to go through a Q&A about housing provider oriented matters that concern, I think, all of us who are here today. So welcome, John, and again, thank you for coming.
Thank you very much, Allison and Amir, and all of those who are involved in putting together this conversation. It's really important that we have a conversation about small property owners and what the experience has been and what we need to do to make sure that we create the conditions for us to house people in Boston through a partnership with small property owners. Let me just start by saying, as Allison said, born in Boston to Cape Verdean parents. And, my parents came, like many immigrants, to find opportunities. And for them, that meant, education, better educational opportunities for all of us. Allison, there were 5 of us. My father first moved to Roxbury, and then a couple of years later was fortunate enough to buy a home. It's a triple-decker, and he raised all 5 of us in that triple-decker. But obviously, with the triple-decker, we had tenants, we had neighbors, and I saw, all of the challenges my father had in helping to provide affordable opportunities for people he knew, for other immigrants who were coming in, and helping to work with them and how they work together to make it work. And so today I'm a property owner and own some rental units in Boston and try to provide that same kind of quality and affordable opportunity for people who need housing. Boston is extremely important, extremely expensive. It is important. But the small property owners actually end up making it really affordable in our neighborhoods. And we don't tell that story enough. We don't tell the story of the property owners who are out here working with families year after year to keep their rents down, to make it work for them and for the property owner. It is a partnership. It is a relationship, and that relationship sometimes becomes difficult because of government ordinances or regulations. And so we've got to be careful, and we have to be able to work with small property owners, not to make it burdensome on them or their tenants as we move forward. I did work when I was 14. First started doing work in my neighborhood at 14 years old, trying to improve my neighborhood by doing some environmental cleanup work in our neighborhood. We had the highest rate of asthma. I've been working to improve the city ever since. Became the executive director of the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative, which was a neighborhood transformation organization in Roxbury at the age of 26. Stayed 13 years there, building affordable housing, parks, playgrounds, improving our neighborhoods with a real focus on home ownership. The neighborhood wanted to increase home ownership because we knew, and it was clear by the residents who came to our meetings, that it matters that we have local small property owners who are providing the kind of affordable living that we need. We helped to transform a neighborhood that was the highest in crime at one point in Boston, the highest asthma rate in Boston, and today it is a thriving, high-quality neighborhood. And the amount of investments we made has been followed by the private sector, and is I would say a thriving neighborhood. I still live in the neighborhood today, and I'm able to raise my 4 children here. And continue to work here to improve the neighborhood. I'm a small business owner as well. I own a restaurant in Dorchester. And small businesses of all types, whether you're a small property owner or a business owner in another industry, the small businesses are important. They're important. They're the lifeblood of our economy. They provide the jobs. They provide the opportunities for other small businesses to thrive as well. And as a small business owner, I'm really proud of that work. But as you said, Allison, I spent the last 7 years as Chief of Economic Development for the City of Boston. And as Chief of Economic Development, I understand that as we grow our economy and as we try to create conditions for our families and residents to continue to live here and afford to live here, we need to look at both sides of the equation, how we create incentives for small property owners to continue to provide housing, and how we create the kinds of conditions that allow for our residents to be able to afford them. And that's a partnership. It's the only way you can make it work. We need to continue to grow housing in Boston. That is absolutely true. But we need to do it in a smart way that doesn't burden anyone. And so glad to be on the call and talking to you about it today.
Well, thank you again for coming. And you and I haven't talked about this, but actually I think Senator Nick Collins put me into a call that you ran at the very beginning of the pandemic. So that was comforting to have some economic support discussion going on during a difficult time. So the first topic, I guess, which is the hot topic today, is the eviction moratorium that Kim Janey has put into place, acting mayor. And certainly we understand the need to keep people in their homes, but this puts, we're in a bit of a bind with this whole situation. Many of our members are not being paid, haven't been paid for now going, not 12, but going closer towards 18 months. They've gone into their personal savings, they've taken loans, they've gotten credit lines from banks, they're doing whatever they can do to keep their property. And we're finding two things are happening as a result. Number one, landlords are voluntarily leaving the business because it's getting too complicated for them to deal with. As you said, many property owners are first generation families here in Boston. They're people who have placed their retirement and their investment into their real estate, their homes that they rent out. And they're just finding that this is too complex for them. And then those units end up getting sold and turned into a gentrification process, perhaps, or they're being foreclosed on. So, and that's obviously the most unfortunate situation, because that's also going to lead to potential homelessness and people not being in units, because it's going to be a lengthy bank process and all kinds of red tape. What is your position on the moratorium that Kim, acting Mayor Janey, has put in place?
Allison, thanks for the question. So I was clear in a public statement that I made yesterday that, in fact, what we should be doing is working with tenants who need assistance and the small business owners, small property owners who need to figure out the arrears, with the financial assistance that's out there, whether it's RAFT or some of the other financial assistance that comes through ARP or some of the earlier monies from federal government to come to help. Many people have not tapped in to the resources that are out there. And some argue the moratorium have kept them away from it, right? Because they feel like there's, they don't have to pay rent. One of the things I had to do very early on, in fact, was talk to tenants. Hey, look, this is not a free rent card. This is a hold on, if you can't pay now, let's work with you and try to figure out how you pay later. So they're now accumulating debt. Mm-hmm. And I've argued that's not a good thing to have families in Boston accumulating debt that's going to come due at some point. It puts the small property owner in a bad place. It puts the tenant in a bad place. We need to, in fact, have outreach, really increase the amount of outreach we're doing to small property owners and landlords to get that assistance out, to begin to cure the arrears, to begin to provide the kinds of because some of it takes time, right? It's like anything else when you work with government money. There's a lot of bureaucracy, there's a lot of paperwork and documents. I heard that too, but we need to work now to get that money out and make sure that we can cure the arrears. They're not going anywhere. To allow them to mount up does no one any service, definitely doesn't do the tenant any service, and it puts the property owner in a really bad place because many of them have bills and mortgages and other things that they've got to pay for. And so, as you said, that creates conditions that are unfavorable. Because I'm a small property owner and a business owner, I understand both the technical assistance that is needed right now for the small property owners and the financial assistance that's needed for all of us to get over this pandemic. I called for very publicly not to do the moratorium, but in fact to push out the money. We have the money available so that no one gets evicted. This should not be the issue. But to continue to accumulate the debt, I thought was the wrong way to go at it. And so, I've been public on it and glad to be able to answer that question for you today.
No, thank you. And that is helpful for all of us to hear and know the different candidates' position on this. Certainly, property owners have a fear that if we have somebody who is more favorably disposed to tenants, to becoming the mayor of the city of Boston, now we're entering a whole new arena with, are we just going to have perpetual eviction moratoriums in Boston? And one of the issues that we're also confronting is, so we had the Supreme Court of the United States, the highest court in the land, rule that this was illegal, not constitutional. So now the burden further falls on the property owners to go forward. And are we supposed to mount a legal action? But now we have municipalities making legislation that impacts everyone on their own. And I don't know if you have any suggestions as to how we might approach that as property owners.
Yeah, and let me just say this. So I've been talking about how, unfortunately, some candidates are creating these false narratives. One narrative is that development is bad for people in communities, and it's just not, right? Development and how we grow is about how we create, in fact, jobs and resources to continue to invest in our city. The other narrative that's false is it's either small property owners or tenants. That's a false narrative, right? Small property owners are providing the kind of housing that we need. 60% of housing, I believe, in Boston
Yes,
comes from small property owners. And so this is a false narrative. We've got to make sure when we're talking about tenants' rights, when we're talking about protecting tenants, the other part of that is working with small property owners to do that. That should not be, there should be no divide there. Unfortunately, people, they have these visions of when you meet a bad property owner, you then, sort of say everybody's bad. No. That's the minority, small group of people that are bad property owners. The property owners that I know out here, my neighbors and others who are providing homes on my streets in my neighborhood, these are good people who want to do the right thing. And so I think that narrative is one we've got to debunk. So you can be, in fact, pro-tenant and pro-property owner. This is not an us versus them. We've got to change that narrative. Now that means when we're looking at ordinances, or when we're looking at things like the moratorium, that we're having both conversations. What does this mean for the tenant? What does this mean for the property owner? What does this mean for their relationship? What does this mean for housing in Boston? There are policies that people are putting out there that I think are reckless, that I think might sound good to some people, unfortunately, but doesn't help ultimately us provide affordable quality housing. And so who ends up hurting? I mean, the small property owner for sure, but also the tenant. And so for me, I just wanted to say that at first. It is true that as we try to work on this, that we need to work with our small property owners and have conversations with them. Look, the first thing I did as chief of economic development very early on in the pandemic was the mayor called me and said, John, can we, and this is before any moratorium conversations, can we call the 10 largest property owners in Boston and begin to talk to them about evictions and what we can do and how we can help them? And that's where the conversation starts. That's where the conversation starts, so we can begin to get ideas about what can happen. What are the pressure points? The largest property owners, they said to me, John, call the banks, right? Call the banks and let's begin to have conversations with the banks. We don't know where this is going, but let's begin to open up the conversations with the banks, because when we need them at the table, we want to have them there. That's how these conversations should go, Allison. We've got to stop demonizing the small property owners. This is a partnership. This is a relationship. I know as a small property owner, it doesn't work without the tenants. It just doesn't. And so this is not a us versus them. This is about all of us making sure housing works for everyone in Boston.
No, I think the last question on the comment on the moratoriums is we were actually testifying, SPOA was in some other legislative hearings, and one of the elected officials actually came and said, landlords have got to get on board and be part of the safety net for people. And I think it's a lot of what we do and a lot of our work is potentially misunderstood, I think. But one thing that we need to make sure people do understand, as you said, pushing the money out there. There's $47 billion there for rental relief. We are not able to directly access that money. It requires the tenant's signature, even through the Department of Housing. You are required to have a tenant signature. This is the equivalent of asking restaurant customers to apply for restaurant relief. So, and with that, I'm gonna hand it over to Amir, and we'll talk about some of our other issues.
Thank you. Thank you, John, for your comments. We deeply appreciate them. And now we have a question about affordable housing. As you know, there are different versions of affordable housing along with different definitions. Do you have a definition for affordable housing in the city of Boston? That's the first question. The second question is, would workforce or middle income housing be included within your definition?
Yeah, Amir, great question. And Amir, if I'm allowed to, Allison snuck in another thing that I have great interest in and just want to talk to real quickly, and then we'll get right to the affordable housing. I won't be too long. But Allison, you're right. I mean, sort of, when I set up a couple of different funds to help small businesses out as chief of economic development. And what I recognize is some of our small business owners, our small property owners, in fact, on main streets, they were having a similar issue with small businesses that couldn't pay rent. So we set up a rental assistance program for our small property owners on main streets that own places with small retail shops on the first floor to allow them for rental assistance. What do? We have to work with the property owner. We have to work with the property owner to help figure out a way to make this work. And in fact, that's how it should work, and so I just wanted to sort of, say to you, my experience has been you can do it, you can make it work in that way. And we were proud to have helped a lot of small property owners and the small businesses in their properties on main streets to make sure that that we were trying to help businesses, both retail and properties, to survive the pandemic.
I actually have a couple of tenants who were beneficiaries of that. And I will say, I think they're in business today because of some of that type of assistance that was provided.
I'm glad to hear that, Allison. Amir, to your question, the definition of affordable housing. First, let's just say we need all levels of affordable housing, Amir. So let me talk about that first before we go to definition, and particularly the second part of your question is exactly right. We are losing the working family. We are losing the quote unquote middle class. We are losing a lot of people in Boston. We're losing a lot of people that I worked with at City Hall who have great jobs but can't afford to be here in Boston, right? And so we got to create conditions that allow for affordability at all ranges, and particularly the working family being able to afford housing here in Boston. And there are different ways to do that. And don't let me get too wonky on this, but I'll use some ways I think we can do that. But first, let me also say, but we also need affordability. It's also about all of the homeless people we're seeing on our streets, right? We need transitional, supportive, permanent housing for homeless. Now, that housing is different. Right, that housing has to come with services. It has to come with different. It's different housing. It protects the people who are living in those homes with extra supports. St. Francis House is building two large apartment buildings downtown with units for permanent transitional housing, along with market rate units. I think it's a fascinating project. I'd like to see more of that in Boston and how we create those kinds of conditions. And then we need, obviously, low income housing for our families. And that needs to be done in accordance to what's happening in the neighborhood. And so there are all types of levels, as you know, from 30% to 80% of AMI, area median income. I've often said we need to have also a look at the neighborhood median income so that affordability is talked about in ways that the neighborhood can understand it. But there are many ways we can do this. For instance, I've often thought, and I've talked, and the assessor and I, Ron Rockow, when he was at the city, and I looked at this. How do we help provide some stability to our small property owners who are providing housing for workforce families? And one of the ways we looked at it was beginning to stabilize our tax bills, right? And so if you, Amir, have a family that you have in one of your properties that's been there and you're trying to keep their rent stable, all of a sudden the city comes in and bumps up your taxes. Well, guess what? You've got to increase rent. So we're not helping you keep the working family in Boston. We need to make sure that if you're committed to keeping your rent increases at a certain level, keep it consistent, that the city then keeps rent increases consistent in that same way, that we're working with you, that we are maybe stabilizing rent increases. We stop the rent increase so you can provide, in fact, that affordable living space. Now, what Ron says is, John, we can do that, but we have to do it with the state. So I don't want to present that I can do that unilaterally as mayor, but those are the kinds of opportunities that I think should exist for our small property owners. I know that there are tons of property owners who lament with me that the only reason they had to increase their rent was because of the taxes, right? They didn't need to increase it right now, but the big cost of increase was taxes. And if that's true, then in those instances, let's work with the small property owner. The other piece that I think is incredibly important, we need to update some of our small properties. We need to, in fact, I mean, as you know, our wiring is outdated with the new appliances that are coming in. We want to do some climate resilient retrofitting. So let's work with our small property owners to provide financing that we don't ask them to pay for until they sell the homes. Right, we will provide the financing up front, no interest. We won't acknowledge the property value increase, but we will provide it because we need to do those improvements without creating conditions for a new bill that you would have to recoup by increasing your rent. I think there's things like that we can do that helps a small property owner and do it in a way where somebody feels comfortable. Right, this is not a one size fit all because everyone's situation is different. But we can do these things and be more creative, help invest in our properties without increasing conditions for affordable housing for workforce families that have a lot of those conditions right now with small property owners in our neighborhoods.
John, continuing from your points, one of our members just made a comment. He said that water and sewer prices and other costs go up in addition to the property taxes, which you know as well. But continuing from the points you were making, do you envision a future? It sounds like you do. I just want to confirm it for our viewership. Do you envision a future where government can partner up with small property owners on a consistent basis so that the small property owners provide the affordable housing rather than just dealing with big developers? And do you foresee other incentives to bring small property owners to the table, possibly in the form of tax breaks or possibly in the form of other types of assistance that will help them provide the property and run it?
Amir, I'm sure you can probably guess what I'm going to say on this one. Absolutely. There's no question about it. The small property owners, we work with large property owners in this way. We work with the corporations in this way. There's no reason why we shouldn't be able to work with small property owners. Look, I'll repeat what I said. 60% of our housing is provided by small property owners in Boston. It makes sense for us to work with you. If we're trying to incentivize you to continue to provide affordable housing, we need to have you at the table. We need to talk about the increases. If it's a water and sewer bill, let's have that conversation. Let's look at how we can do this in a more affordable way. We need to also look at, I think someone put in the chat, equipment, new windows, new heating systems. As you know, we're trying to incentivize people to improve their heating system, improve their windows. We're all talking about energy efficiency. Let's talk about then how we do this in a way that it's more affordable for our small property owners. I think that's the right conversation to have. I'm ready to have it day one.
Thank you. Allison, did you want to add to anything?
No, I think I'll just comment that I think your comments, John, are very insightful. These are a lot of really smart ideas. And another mixed use project is the Mary Ellen McCormick over in South Boston.
Right.
So that's a partnership with, I think, 1,370 units with 570 deeply subsidized, 200 middle income, and 600 market rate units. So that's another, we really need innovative solutions. And I'm going to be very interested to watch that project go forward. That's in my neighborhood. So I just that's my only comment on the affordable piece.
That's right, Allison. I mean, I'll just to sort of echo you a little bit. We have innovative solutions that we've tried. We can be innovative when we're trying to figure out how to create more economic value that we can reinvest in housing. And some of the things that I've talked about, I've done. We, in fact, have capped tax increases on the land trust that I ran at the Dutch Neighborhood Initiative. We have models. We have precedents. We can do this, and we can be innovative. We have precedents at Old Colony on how we do things differently and bring public money together with private money to help improve housing. I think these are things that we can do as government. Let's use some of our successes and let's scale it out there and do more.
Thank you. Moving on to the issue of rent control. John, I know that you wrote an op-ed fairly recently about your position on rent control. Could you kindly enlighten our viewers about what your thoughts are?
Yeah, Amir, I know there are candidates out there talking about rent control, and I've seen surveys where they're saying that, upwards of 76% of voters want to see rent control. And so now candidates are pushing for it. I think those surveys are residents saying we'd like to see more affordable options. I don't think it's rent control. It might be a nice slogan, catchphrase, but it is the absolute wrong policy. I mean, economists don't agree on many things, but I don't know one economist who agrees that rent control is a good thing. It disadvantages, sort of us in many ways. One is you take a very high rental market and you cap it, and that makes no sense. Second is it doesn't create the opportunity for us to continue to invest in those properties when we need to. I've said the way to create affordable housing is at the beginning of building the housing. You have to create conditions by which you reinvest in the housing by making it affordable, have subsidies, and understand where the subsidies are going to come moving forward to reinvest in that housing, not by capping rent today on the stock of housing that exists. It will push people out of the city by hampering the production of new housing. It will not incentivize us to grow our housing stock. And as you know, we're growing in population. We're growing in population as a city, and we need to build more housing so that we can keep up with demand. The mayor, I think, last goal we had, I think, was 74,000 or something close to that. We had 69.
It went from 35 to, I think, 77. It was something around there.
Thanks, Allison. I've seen reports. The McKinsey report laid out most recently said we need about 125,000, right? Which is probably more accurate given what the census has said to us. Rent control will not help us get there. It will decentivize people building more housing in Boston. It'll be problematic in so many different ways. And if we build less housing in Boston, the rent will increase exponentially, and housing costs, those who are trying to buy houses, will find it even more expensive to buy homes in the city of Boston. It would be a disaster.
John, as you indicated earlier, a lot of property owners are deeply concerned about the provisions of rent control, including the whole idea that tenants will be insulated from market forces while the property owners will be left to deal with rising maintenance and repair costs, taxes, and many other expenses. But beyond that, if you think about the way rent control was implemented, in the 70s and 80s, there were built-in mechanisms. It wasn't just an issue of price capping. In between the lines, there were built-in mechanisms that enabled tenants to get away with non-payment. It became very difficult for a lot of people to remove non-compliant tenants who didn't follow the rules of the house, who committed acts of vandalism, for instance. Some versions of rent control even restricted property owners from not renewing leases, even when the leases expired after 12 months, which really amounted to a taking of property, because at that point, it's no longer a rental agreement. It's a situation where the tenant becomes the master and the property owner becomes a slave within his or her own property. especially in cases where after a 12-month lease, if you need the apartment for yourself or a family member who may need it, or simply if you have a bad actor. Now, it's not us against them. Many tenants are good people, but if you do have someone who's harassing you or taking advantage of you, that option to not renew simply isn't there. Beyond that, we heard a lot of stories about rent control attorneys who really defended the tenant the troublesome tenant behaviors, no matter what, just to prolong the process, to extort money from the property owner. In some places, not Boston, but in Cambridge, they even had rent control boards, which were also referred to as rent control tribunals, which denied the property owners' requests to make repairs. And they would make the property owners, the housing providers, wait for long periods of time, as the tenants themselves suffered from decayed housing, only to deny those repairs. And then in other situations, just out of pure spite, there was one case, I believe in Cambridge in the 80s, where they ordered a housing provider to do something very unrealistic that was uncalled for. I think it involved lifting the foundation of his home, which was basically impossible. The poor gentleman, he went home and he died from a heart attack 2 days later. So per the statements that you made at the beginning, it is a two-way street. We have to protect the tenant, but we also have to protect the housing provider. And so having heard all of that, when these other people advocate for rent control, are they aware of all this, or do you think they're ignoring it just for the purpose of dividing tenants and property owners just so that they can get a consistent pool of voters?
Yeah, Amir, I mean, that's a sad story, but I could see that story, right? You could see that playing out where a small property owner um, who's asked to lift their home up by the foundation up, it has a heart attack. I mean, that's just, look, I do think, to your question, just want to answer your question. I don't think people understand how it plays out. I don't think in general our folks really understand all that goes in to trying to make it work. And so we need to do a better job of having everybody at the table. The small property owner needs to be at the table when we're talking about these things, so that when government is looking at any of these provisions, any of these regulations, that we're having conversations that allow for people to say, hey, by the way, here's how that would really work, right? Here's a scenario that would play out. And then we can make sure that doesn't happen. I've heard of horrible stories under the last rent control situation, which is why we repealed it, right? That's why, that's why it's no longer on the books. But we tend to forget when things leave the books for a while, and so those stories I think are important. So I think it is important that there's a mayor in the office that will listen to small property owners as we move forward and work together in partnership to figure out, because I do think that our small property owners, they don't want Boston to continue to be too expensive. Nobody wants that, right? But they want to make it work for the small property owner, which then in turn works for the tenant, and to get to a condition where it doesn't work, everybody loses. So we will make sure, I will make sure under the Barros administration that I continue to work with small property owners, whether it's on main streets or on the back streets of our city, to have a conversation about how we support them being able to provide quality housing for the residents of Boston. And then if the state is contemplating anything, because if there's a rent control possibility, the state will be passing in that city. If the state is contemplating anything, I will use whatever I can as mayor to make sure that we're at the table, to make sure that we're there to say what we think, and that we shouldn't have rent control, and that there are other ways that we can handle the situation. So I think we've got to be creative. We've got to come up with our recommendations. Let's not wait for them to try to pass rent control. Let's step out there. Let's talk about some of these other things that we can do together to help small property owners as they try to help our tenants in the city.
It really means a lot when you talk about bringing property owners to the table, to have the discussion with government, with tenant advocates, I assume as well, and other groups. we also believe that, people in government, we have a feeling that they're not completely aware about how the regular eviction process works. In a lot of cases, they think that landlords are these, housing providers. They think that we're these monsters who chase after the unpaid rent, to which we're entitled, actually. But in reality, in many cases, we forego that money when there's an eviction, just to have a chance to start over again, to re-rent our units. We forego thousands of dollars, just to get possession of our units back. And these eviction processes do provide tenants with more time and more flexibility when there's a problem. That's also one reason why we're against the eviction moratoriums, because we believe that the housing courts, they step in, to give the tenants more time. That's often good for the tenants. There are times when it's good for the property owner, but there are other times when the property owners suffer more, because after not being able to collect unpaid rent for a long period of time, they also have to incur other expenses as these eviction processes continue, as they get delayed, as they become more and more drawn out. In a Barros administration, would you consider the possibility of having more discussions where different voices come to the table in the interest of not only educating others, but potentially advocating for an eviction process that is more quick, more effective, and more efficient for all parties involved?
Amir, the answer is absolutely. And I'll talk about some of my track record. First, before I do that, let me talk about the last thing we did right before I left office. I worked with affordable housing advocates to look at where we can find more resources to build more affordable housing in Boston. Now, many of those advocates had a lot of ideas about how to do that, and we said, all right, next thing, let's work with our developers, right, to figure out what makes sense, right? And so, because I think some of the things that we were looking at and that they were recommending, would disincentivize the building of housing, period, right? And therefore the building of affordable housing. And so we got the developers at the table, had the conversation, and what we came up with was, okay, let's increase the linkage fee. For commercial property over 100,000 square feet, we're going to tack on more of a fee, and everybody thought it could work without disincentivizing the building of commercial space in Boston, and we could find more money to build housing. It works. Having people at the table where you're talking about both the advocates and you're talking to those who are providing whatever the opportunity is, whether it's housing or anything else, is how we should do this, right? And that's how I've led as Chief of Economic Development, and that's how I would lead as mayor. The small property owners would be at the table to have the conversations about what can work. There's no reason why our advocates and our small property owners couldn't be talking to each other. But they need to know that there's an administration who values both perspectives and who understands the only way this works is if our small property owners are also in the conversation to talk about what works for them and doesn't work for them. And right now, it feels like the small property owners haven't been at the table, and we need to do a better job of making sure that happens.
Thank you, John. Allison, I'll turn it over to you.
One comment I would just make is this also bleeds into, other elements. For example, in South Boston, we're having a big problem with parties on roof decks and people having large parties that are very disturbing to the neighborhood. So, and it is a real problem, I can attest. But what is then the solution to that's being floated is to find these bad absentee landlords. And I think there's not the common understanding that if we can't evict our tenants, we can't control what goes on in the units. So we have all these, and this is going back to eviction, but then so we have all of these issues that you're talking about. And I like your approach in terms of innovation. One thing that was floated amongst our group was, why don't we take away the city parking permits for the people, the perpetrators, the tenants who are having these large parties, instead of penalizing the city owns the parking. But that's and I can also attest, having been witness to the parties, I can attest to how much the people having the parties value their parking. So we would just really like to see more of, if we can come together to have creative solutions, I think we may have a better outcome. So anyway, on to the tax questions. The millionaire's tax is being floated. So that, we believe, or we're hearing, is going to go on as a ballot question. That's going to tack on 4%. And then there are additional taxes being floated, which is a 2% surtax for sales over 2 million, I believe it is. I've seen different versions of surtaxes being proposed. So I wonder if you might just talk with us for a minute about your view on the millionaire's tax and other surtax proposals, on how they impact the real estate industry.
Yeah, it's and just as a former chief of economic development, any of these taxes aren't good for our competitiveness. Let me just say that. But I do publicly support both of those taxes. I publicly support the millionaire tax, and I publicly support the transfer tax. I don't like the millionaire tax and how it's framed, but I do understand, as we look at our taxing rates, that in fact, Massachusetts, we used to be 1 point taxachusetts. Let's be careful not to get there, but I think can do this millionaire tax. We've got to be careful on the application and how it gets done, because it sends a bad message and deters entrepreneurs particularly. And we've got a really robust ecosystem of startups in our city. And that's, for me, where I get most worried about it. But I think in fact, when you look at the numbers and you look at taxing in Massachusetts, I think we can do the millionaire tax. The property tax is another one that I've seen work in other cities. I like the millionaire tax. Originally was like, wait a minute, what is this? What's going on? It has worked where you can have a 2% over something like 2 million to continue to fund different things. But I think that it has to be affordable housing that we fund directly, so that we are using that income to, in fact, build more housing in the city of Boston.
Thank you. Yeah, we heard from one of our members in the spirit of what you were saying, who commented that a lot of us are first generation immigrants, second generation immigrants. And when you think about the American dream, the ability to come here to start your own business, this lady was saying that the American dream is under attack, just given all the anti-property owner proposals that are out there. And along those lines, in good faith, when it comes to the issue of the landlord, or I should say the housing provider tenant alliance, this is an idea that's been floated around out there. Housing providers have been talking about it. We've been talking about the possibility of these alliances as potential programs where housing providers can educate tenants about home ownership, possibly sharing responsibilities, possibly sharing maintenance costs or other efforts with tenants. Does this idea apply to you? And if you do approve of it, what do you think of the idea, an idea involving the government and housing providers pooling resources to help tenants on their path to home ownership, rather than having a permanent generation of renters in the city?
Yeah, Amir, you are clearly talking about something that I would be all in on. It's a great idea. Government should be at the table helping to make that work. We already have a home ownership program. We should be providing that in that kind of a scenario. We're therefore helping to subsidize that opportunity. There's so many different things that we can do to help make that a reality. On the business side, employee co-ops have been something that I've worked on and works well, right? There is, I think, I forget the name of the program in BHA, Section 8 housing. There is an opportunity for you to use your Section 8 voucher to in fact pay down mortgage, right? And so there are ways and opportunities for us to think more creatively about that kind of an alliance, and then think about the kinds of initiatives that we can work together on to help increase home ownership. I am all in on that. I think that's a great idea.
Thank you.
I know we just had a question about, I guess Boston is going to be implementing an energy policy. And it's a climate change initiative that we're hearing from a lot of people. This is maybe it's on the commercial end, but a lot of landlords don't know about this. And it's going to include audits that go through in terms of what type of fuel, whether you're using gas, you're using oil. These audits are extremely costly at a really difficult time. I mean, I think the commercial sector has been hit even harder than the residential sector, with people leaving and working from home. This is something that I think, again, is a lot of landlords don't know about, but it's potentially highly punitive for a city that has older buildings. I mean, for landlords to get into retrofitting boilers and all of this at a time when we're struggling, these things all just start to stack up, and we just look at each other and say, gee, we're almost out of runway here. And now we've got to challenge a moratorium, or, so I just wondered if you had any comments on the energy policy front.
Yeah, Allison, I think you're referring to the Berto ordinance, right?
Yeah.
Building energy reporting something ordinance. It's my understanding is that it's for buildings that are 35,000 square feet and higher, and we have to couple our drive to try to become a more climate resilient city with financing to do it. There's just no other way. We just have to work with the property owners to do it, whether large or small. As Chief of Economic Development, I created this thing called the Renew Boston Trust. Excuse me. The Renew Boston Trust, in fact, works with the larger property owners to help create financing for them to improve their conditions. As we begin to look at some of the older stock and smaller properties being more efficient, we've got to create the financing for them to do it. And if we don't work with the small property owners to do it, we can't go do reporting on buildings. So this has to be hand in hand. The city has to be held accountable for working with our property owners to make sure that Boston's resilient. We can't do it. We can't allow property owners or ask our small property owners to do it by themselves, or else we're being contradictory. If we are trying to create a more affordable Boston, then we can't just allow small property owners to retrofit their homes, because the only way they can capture those kinds of costs is by increasing rent. The city has to work with the small property owner to make sure, in fact, that we're partnering with retrofitting homes to make it more efficient, and in many ways make it more healthy and safer, so that we can continue to move our city forward. And so I just want to say to you, I think as we continue to expand Berto, that financing options have to be available, or else Boston's going to become more expensive, and that's not what we want.
John, for the sake of clarification, do you think that the city should work more with the federal government in a more balanced way, as opposed to leaving it up to, let's say, small developers to solve all the problems?
Well, what we should do with the federal government, Amir, is the Biden administration, and that's exactly when I was talking about financing, I should have said this, the Biden administration is putting out a once-in-a-generation infrastructure program that is to help cities become more climate resilient. Part of that is our buildings. It's buildings make up 70% of carbon emissions. And so bringing some of that federal funding to Boston to help our small property owners update their buildings is exactly how we should do this. Partnering with the federal government is really important. If we only allow this to be done through private investment, like I said before, Boston will continue to become more expensive, And then that immigrant, Amir, that you talked about, that's coming in to try to, get to the American dream. My father's, 70 years ago, right? As he's trying to buy his house for his family in Boston, all of a sudden he can't do it because of all the things we're demanding them to do without the assistance to do it. And so this has to be a partnership with government. The feds have to step in. I think Biden has proposed something that we could use here in our city. And by the way, Amir, I think I'm well positioned to work with the Biden administration and our Secretary of Labor to make that happen.
That's
Thank
true.
you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Before we wrap up, John, I mean, we all know that the primary election is coming up on September 14th. Is there anything else that you want to say to our audience, either about these issues or any other issue?
Well, I think, what I want to say to the audience, Mayor, first is a thank you to you and Allison and all of your members for the opportunity to address these issues. I apologize for my raspy voice. I've been talking a lot recently, and so I just want to appreciate your tolerance on that. Housing is critical. It's important. We know that for the students that aren't stably housed, they don't do well in school. For the families that aren't, stably housed, there are all types of health issues. And so it is, and so all of you that are listening, all the members, thank you for providing 60% of our housing in the city of Boston. And I also know that you're the majority of the affordable housing that we see in our city. In fact, 20% is provided by city government subsidies, but the rest of it is all private. And so I just wanted to say thank you. And as I've done in the past, I will be a mayor that collaborates with all stakeholders to make sure that we work together. I know it can't just be one side of the coin, or else it doesn't work. These are systems. Our economy are made up of systems, people who are providing supplies and those who are in demand of some of those supplies, whether we're talking about housing, services, products, whatever it is. And we've got to make the equilibrium work for all of us so that we can advance together. So I appreciate you coming on today and listening to me. I appreciate the questions. And I just want to invite you all to look at my policies at barrosformayor.com. And then on September 14th, consider giving me a vote for mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, John. It's a great pleasure to have you. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be with us. On behalf of the Small Property Owners Association, we thank John Barros. We wish you a lot of luck. We wish you success. We also hope that you'll consider coming back to talk to us again in the future if you have time. And before we close, I just want to say to our viewers, please kindly donate to the Small Property Owners Association at www.spoa.com. We really need your help. And Allison, did you want to make any closing remarks?
No, John, I want to thank you for coming. You're clearly a very smart man and you have great ideas for us. So I'm appreciative, and I don't know what to do when we get thanked, because that doesn't happen to us very often. So, but we will look forward to talking to you again. And I wish you a lot of luck as well on the 14th. And I know many people who are listening will as well.
Thank you, Allison. I look forward to being back as mayor. I appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you, John, and have a good afternoon, everyone. Good day. Thanks.